to the content of Sri Shara College for Women. My name is Gomathi, and this content is about absorption of water. Well, all of us know that from the very early stage, the plants obtain water through their roots. Most of the water absorption is carried out by the younger parts of the root. Just behind the growing tip of a young root is the piliferous region made up of hundreds of projections of epidermal tissues, the root hairs. So, taking all these things into consideration, now this session is going to be about how the mechanism of water absorption happens. This is generally done through two processes, which we call active absorption, and the second is passive absorption. Now, in this e-content, we will be looking on to the mechanism and the theories that are governing the absorption of water. Welcoming to the active absorption of water, in this process, the root cells play active role in the absorption of water, and metabolic energy released through respiration is consumed in this absorption. Well, they may be of two kinds. The first step involved is the active absorption of water. Here, osmosis is involved in the osmotic absorption, as there will be an imbibition of soil water by the plants. Osmotic pressure of cell sap of root hairs will be usually high. Then the soil water will therefore increase. Therefore, the diffusion pressure deficit and the suction pressure in the root hair becomes higher, and the water from the cell wall enters into them through plasma membrane by osmotic diffusion. As a result, osmotic pressure, suction pressure, and diffusion pressure deficit of root hairs have become low, while their turgor pressure is increased. Now, what happens is, the cortical cells adjacent to the root hairs have high osmotic pressure, suction pressure, and diffusion pressure deficit in comparison to the root hairs. Therefore, water is drawn into the adjacent cortical cells from the root hairs by osmotic diffusion. In the same way, by cell-to-cell osmotic diffusion, gradually the water reaches the innermost cortical cells and the endodermis. Osmotic diffusion of water into endodermis takes place through special thin wall passage cells, because the other endodermis cells have Casparian stripes on the thin wall, which are impervious to water. So water from the endodermis cells flows down into the cells of pericycle by osmotic diffusion, which now become turgid, and the suction pressure is decreased. In the last step, water is drawn into xylem from turgid pericycle cells. That is, in the roots, the vascular bundles are radical, and protoxylem elements are in contact with pericycle. It is because in the absence of turgor pressure of the xylem vessel, the suction pressure of xylem vessel becomes higher than the suction pressure of the cell of the pericycle when water enters into the xylem from pericycle. A presume is developed in the xylem of roots, which can raise the water to certain length in the xylem. Now, this pressure is what we call root pressure. Well, generally speaking, I'll put things in a nutshell, where imbibition of soil water by hydrophilic cell wall, further osmotic pressure of the cell sap will increase, subsequently osmotic pressure of soil water, then the osmotic pressure of soil water. Now the diffusion pressure deficit in the root has become higher, followed by water from the cell wall will enter into them through the membrane by osmotic diffusion. Further, as a result, osmotic pressure, diffusion pressure deficit of the root hair becomes lower, and the turgor pressure will increase. Now, the cortical cells adjacent to the root hair will have higher osmotic pressure and the diffusion pressure deficit in comparison to root hairs by osmotic diffusion. Well, now further moving on, what happens is, likewise, water moves from the osmotic diffusion and reaches endodermis. Now, when the endodermis water moves through passage cells, now water reaches pericycle, and then pericycle becomes turgid, and their diffusion pressure deficit is decreased. Then, in the last step, water is drawn into the xylem. Fine. And from turgid pericycle cells, no pressure is developed in the xylem of root by water entry. As a result, the root pressure is happening. Now, coming to the next thing is non-osmotic absorption. Water is absorbed against the osmotic gradient in this non-osmotic absorption. Okay, so this is how we call this non-osmotic theory. Sometimes it has been observed that the absorption of water takes place even when osmotic pressure of soil water is higher than osmotic pressure of cell sap. This type of absorption, which is non-osmotic and against the osmotic gradient, requires the expenditure of metabolic energy, probably through respiration. So this is non-osmotic theory. So according to Bennett and Clark in 1936, the plant absorbed water from the soil by an active non-osmotic mechanism. This active water uptake requires expenditure of metabolic energy. Now, there is some experimental evidences also which shows that there is a direct correlation between the rate of respiration and water uptake. Decrease in the rate of respiration and water absorption by low temperature, low oxygen, tension, and respiratory inhibitors were observed. Further increased in rates of respiration and water uptake were seen happening by means of oxons. These observations indirectly prove the participation of metabolic energy in the process of water uptake. Further, when salt absorption is an energy-consuming active process, water uptake too should be energy-consuming. However, there is little or no direct evidences to prove the participation of metabolic energy in the process. Further, there is also one more theory called electro-osmotic theory. According to Keller, in the year 1930, plant absorbs water from the soil electro-osmotically. It is a process by which water moves along an electrical gradient. The plant cell walls are negatively charged. They produce an opposite charge on water surface by induction. Water therefore moves towards the negative pole, which perhaps lies in the interior of roots. Since the potential difference is negligible, this theory did not find any support. Now let's move on to the passive absorption. Now coming to the passive absorption of water takes place when rate of transpiration is usually high. Rapid evaporation of water from the leaves during transpiration creates a tension in water in the xylem of the leaves. This tension is transmitted to water in xylem of the roots through the xylem of stream, and water rises upwards and as a result reaching the upper surfaces. As a result, soil water enters into the cortical cells through root hairs to reach the xylem of the root to maintain the supply of water. The force of this entry of water is created in leaves due to rapid transpiration, and hence the root cells remain passive during this process. Or in other words, let me put into very simple terms that due to high rate of transpiration, the cells of mesophyll lose water to exterior through stomata. As a result, their turgor pressure decreases and diffusion pressure deficit increases. If all the leaf cells were at the same diffusion pressure deficit, the outer mesophyll cells take water from the inner cells, thereby decreasing their turgor pressure and increasing the diffusion pressure deficit. The process is repeated till the deficiency of water is conveyed to the nearest xylem. When water is lost through all the stomata of a leaf, a joint deficiency of water is conveyed to the midrib of the leaf. When all the leaves of a plant transpire, a combined deficiency of water is conveyed to the xylem of the root through xylem of the stem. The root xylem takes water from the cells of the pericycle, thereby decreasing their turgor pressure and increasing the diffusion pressure deficit. The process is repeated in the direction of root epidermis. Ultimately, the deficiency of water is conveyed to the root hair cell. The root hair absorbs water from the soil due to increased suction tension endosmotically. To reiterate, The osmotic potential in xylem is slightly negative. Since water is under tension, pressure potential is also negative. Therefore, water potential is more negative in the xylem than in the soil water. Water thus moves from the soil into the plant. So now coming to the absorption of water by aerial parts. Depending upon the water potential, the aerial parts of the plants, particularly the leaves, can absorb water from the atmosphere to a little extent. The cutin and the pectin layers of apple leaves possess good water absorbing capacity. According to Brizielli et al. 1951, if water potential gradients are favorable, water absorbed by the leaves of tomato and maize can travel in a negative direction, that is down to the soil. Fine. Before looking on to the several factors affecting water absorption, I'd like to explain the three water movement mechanism in plants. One is apoplastic pathway, the second one is symplastic pathway, and the third one is transmembrane pathway. Now, what is an apoplastic pathway? Apoplastic movement of water in plants occur exclusively through cell wall without decreasing any membrane. The cortex receives majority of water through apoplastic way as loosely bound cortical cells do not offer any resistance. But the movement of water in root beyond cortex, apoplastic pathway, is blocked by Casparian stripes present in the endodermis. Now looking about the symplastic pathway. The movement of water from one cell to another cell through the plasmodesmata is called the symplastic pathway of water movement. This pathway comprises the network of cytoplasm of all cells interconnected by plasmodesmata. Now, what is transmembrane pathway? In plant roots, water movement from soil till the endodermis occurs through apoplastic pathway, that is only through cell wall. The Casparian stripes in the endodermis are made up of wax-like substances called suberin, which blocks water and solute movement through the cell wall of the endodermis. As a result, water is forced to move throughout the membrane and may cross the tonoplast of the vacuole. This movement of water through cell membrane is what we call a transmembrane pathway. Well, friends, now let us look on to factors affecting water absorption. Soil water. A plant absorbs capillary water from soil. In other words, absorption of water by plant roots take place from field capacity till the arrival of permanent wilting percentage. Now, this permanent wilting percentage of a soil depends upon the test plant because it is determined by the osmotic factor. When there is no capillary water in the soil, usually there is no absorption and the plant suffers from physiological dryness. The soil at percentage or permanent wilting percentage is physically wet but physiologically dry. In the daytime, there is decrease in soil water in the vicinity of plant roots. As a result, what happens is this wilting percentage increases. As a result, the water move around from the near the plant roots, and thus now the pressure or the factors affecting water absorption decreases. The water potential of the plant is negative in the day and more negative at night. Soil solution. A plant usually absorbs water from the soil when the outer solution is hypotonic to the cell sap of root has. In other words, water is absorbed because there exists a water potential gradient between the soil solution and the cell sap of inner root cells. Some halophytes can tolerate a high salt concentration. However, there is no water absorption in other cases, and the plants suffer from physiological dryness. Soil temperature. The temperature cardinals for water absorptions are variable. Maximum absorption, however, occurs between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius. The absorption rate decreases above 30 degrees Celsius and below 20 degrees Celsius. At a temperature near freezing point, the viscosity of water increases and the permeability of cytomembranes decreases. The root metabolism also decreases, and as a result, the diffusibility of water decreases and may be totally stopped. A plant thus suffers from physiological dryness. Soil aeration. Temporary wilting of tobacco plant is seen if they are exposed to bright sunlight after heavy rains. This phenomenon is called flopping. It occurs due to decrease in water uptake on account of poor drainage, causing lack of proper aeration. Soil oxygen is needed for root respiration. Decrease in oxygen contents retards overall metabolism of roots, and as a result, the uptake of water is reduced. Finally, increase in carbon dioxide content of soil causes a decrease in the permeability of cytomembranes and an increase in the viscosity of protoplasm. As a result, water uptake by roots is greatly affected. However, in nature, the soil carbon dioxide concentration never reaches toxic level. Hope you find this video interesting. Thank you for listening.